Have you ever imagined the weight of holding an envelope that literally contains the end of the world as you know it, and having to go back to the kitchen and pretend, with a perfect smile, a steady voice, every muscle in your body lying, that everything is alright? What if the mail you just received is just boring adult stuff, when it's actually a warning that in 72 hours you and your children will be out on the street? What normalcy you worked so desperately to maintain the cereal for breakfast, the organized school bags, the bedtime routine is all going to be ripped away because you couldn't make impossible numbers work. Claire Morgan lived through that moment, and the choices she made in the next 72 hours, then the man who noticed what no one else did, changed everything. The letter arrived on a Monday morning, the kind of morning that should have been ordinary. Children at the kitchen table, Lily, 7 years old, carefully eating generic cereal that Claire had bought because it was 30 cents cheaper than the brand name version. Owen, 5, grimacing at the milk that tasted slightly sour because the expiration date had passed yesterday. But throwing it away wasn't an option when every dollar counted. Sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating stains on the wall that Claire hadn't had time to paint. Radio playing softly, routine, normalcy. Everything Claire had fought to preserve for 2 years since her divorce. And then the sound of a mail truck, a familiar diesel engine stopping out front, a door slamming shut, footsteps on the porch. And then, the sound Claire had been dreading for months, a firm knock that meant certified mail. It meant legal document. It meant time was up. She stood up from the table. "Just a minute, kids. Mommy will be right back." Calm voice. Practiced. She went to the door, signed the receipt with a hand that danned. This was important. Didn't tremble. Because she had practiced not trembling. She had practiced keeping her composure when the world was falling apart. She had become an expert at performing everything's fine when nothing was fine. She picked up the envelope, white, official, and bold red letters that seemed to scream even when printed. Final eviction notice, 72 hours, not notice, not reminder, final, as in last, as in no more chances. 72 hours, 3 days. Claire closed the door. She stood in the hallway for a moment, just holding the paper, processing. She had known it was coming. Of course she knew. She hadn't paid her mortgage in 4 months. The bank had sent notices, called constantly, started foreclosure proceedings. But there was a difference between knowing abstractly that eviction was coming and holding a specific date, a specific time. The concrete reality of Thursday, 10 a.m., Sheriff Michael Torres will appear with a legal order to remove you and minors from this property. She opened the envelope. She read legalistic words that reduced her life to default and property recovery and forced removal if necessary. She read the part that said if she didn't leave voluntarily, their belongings would be placed on the sidewalk, that locks would be changed, that police would be present, that resistance would result in arrest. Cold, bureaucratic, efficient, as if it were processing paperwork, not destroying a family. Claire folded the letter carefully. Her hands weren't trembling yet because she couldn't let them. Not here, not now. Not with Lily and Owen just a few feet away, eating cereal and watching cartoons, oblivious to the fact that in 3 days they would be homeless. She went to the bedroom. She opened a dresser drawer and underwear drawer where children never looked because it was mommy's drawer. She placed a letter at the bottom, underneath old brass and socks with holes, hidden, just as she had hidden all the other notices, all the other evidence that she was failing to provide the most basic thing: a roof over their heads. And she went back to the kitchen. Smile returned to its place. Mask perfectly adjusted. "Everything all right?" Lily asked. Big eyes green, like Claire's, looking up with a concern that a 7-year-old shouldn't have to carry. Lily had always been observant, always attuned to adults' emotions in a way that made Claire wonder how much she really understood, how much she had already noticed that things weren't right even if Mom pretended they were. "Everything's great, dear," Claire lied. And it wasn't a small lie. It was a huge lie. A lie that covered an abyss. Just boring adult mail, bills and stuff like that. Nothing important. Nothing important. Just a warning that their home was going to be taken away. That in 72 hours they would have nowhere to go. That mom had failed so completely, so spectacularly, that she couldn't even keep a roof over their heads. But I couldn't say that. I couldn't put that weight on the shoulders of a 7-year-old. Finish your cereal, baby. School in 20 minutes. Routine. Normalcy. As if the next 3 days were like any other. As if Thursday was just Thursday, not the day their world ended. And Claire continued. She packed their bags, checked their homework, tied Owen's shoes because he still hadn't mastered them, kissed them both and sent them to the bus stop, and watched them walk down the street, Lily, holding Owen's hand as she always did, protective even though she was only 2 years older. And when they disappeared around the corner, when she was sure they couldn't see, Claire finally let the mask fall. She leaned against the door and allowed herself to tremble, just for a minute, just enough to release pressure before she had to put her armor back on and go to work and pretend for another day that she wasn't sinking, because that's what she did. She feigned normalcy while everything burned around her. She protected her children from devastating truth for as long as possible, even knowing that when they finally found out, then they would find out, inevitably, cataclysmically, it would be worse for having hidden it. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever carried a secret so heavy it threatened to crush you, but you had to smile through it because the people you love couldn't know yet? Claire carried the baby for 2 years, and now she had 3 days. 72 hours to discover a miracle that didn't exist. Or 72 hours until Lily and Owen discovered that mom, despite all her effort, all her sacrifice, all her work, to the point of exhaustion, wasn't enough. That they were going to lose the only home they knew, and there was no way to make it okay. Stay with me until the end. Because what happened in those 72 hours, the impossible decisions Claire had to make, the moment her mask finally cracked, and the man who realized the truth she was hiding so desperately, was a journey through the quietest and most devastating kind of despair, the kind of sinking, where you go downhill alone while the world keeps turning, where you smile and wave and pretend you're swimming when you're actually drowning, and where salvation, when it finally comes from the most unexpected place, from someone who should have been just another cog in the machine that was destroying you, but who chose, against all odds, to see humanity where the system only saw paperwork. Claire went to work, because what else could she do? Stay home staring at walls that wouldn't be hers for much longer. Sit and process the magnitude of the disaster. There was no luxury of collapse. Not when she had to appear functional. Not when bills were still arriving even though she couldn't pay them. Not when children still needed to be fed, clothed, sent to school with smiles that suggested everything was normal. So she drove to the supermarket where she worked as a shift manager. A job that, theoretically, should pay enough to live on, but in practice was structured to keep employees just below full-time so the company could avoid paying benefits. 32 hours a week. $11.75 an hour. Math that never worked. No matter how many times she tried to make the numbers add up. She parked in the employee parking lot. An old Cara 2008 Honda Civic with 240,000 kilometers on it, and a strange noise in the engine that she didn't have the money to investigate. She just prayed every time she started it that the engine would start again. Because losing the car meant losing her job, and losing her job meant, well, worse than it already was, which was hard to imagine, but certainly possible. She walked in through the employee's door, clocked in, put on a vest that said manager, as if the title meant anything beyond extra responsibilities for the same inadequate pay, and started her shift. Checked inventory. Dealt with a customer complaint about an expired coupon. Trained a new cashier who looked 16, and probably was, working after school like Claire had done at the same age. Troubleshooted a jammed cash register. Routine, familiar, almost comforting in its predictability, even if exhausting. But through it all, the letter burned in her mind. 72 hours, now less. 68 hours maybe. Time slipping away with each passing minute, standing behind the customer service counter, solving other people's trivial problems, while her own world crumbled. And the question she couldn't stop asking, what did she tell the children? How do you explain to 7- and 5-year-olds that they're going to lose their house? That they won't have their own room, their own bed, toys that don't fit in a car anymore? How do you say mommy failed in a way that doesn't destroy them? Claire had considered waiting until the last minute, Wednesday night, the eve of the eviction. Say we have to leave tomorrow and make it seem adventurous somehow. Let's go camping, but in a car, in some parking lot. And then what? Shelters were full. She called weeks ago when she learned eviction was inevitable. Waiting list. Try again next month. As if next month would help when she needed a place to stay today. Family. She didn't have any friends. Not real ones. Not the kind she could call and say, I can stay on your couch with 2 kids indefinitely. Coworkers were cordial, but not close. A regular client who was always kind, she couldn't ask for that. Ex-husband, he'd completely disappeared. No contact for 8 months. And even if he knew where he was, Derek had made it clear he didn't want paternal responsibility. Forcing him to help would require legal processes that would take months, with money she didn't have. If something like this has ever happened to you, if you've ever felt that kind of silent despair, where all doors are closed and you're alone with impossible problems, share in the comments. Because Claire isn't alone. Thousands of people live this reality every day, hiding behind smiles, because admitting they can't cope seems like a personal failing, when it's actually a systemic failure. During her lunch break, 15 unpaid minutes, that the company was legally required to give, Claire sat in the employee break room. She didn't eat. She hadn't brought lunch because food at home was for the child. She just drank water from the fountain and looked at her phone. She scrolled through resources she'd already explored hundreds of times. Housing assistance, 2-year waiting list, SNAP tonight, $23 a month above the eligibility line. Unemployment insurance. Doesn't apply. She was still employed. Local churches with emergency funds, already applied, exhausted. There was GoFundMe. She'd seen people create campaigns. Help family avoid eviction. But the idea of putting her life online for strangers to judge, of publicly begging, of admitting failure so blatantly, pride, stupid, self-destructive pride, wouldn't allow it. Not yet. Maybe when they were literally on the street she'd swallow her pride. But not yet. Not when there was still, what? Hope. There was no hope. Only denial, disguised as dignity. The shift ended at 5. Claire drove back home, which wouldn't be hers for much longer. She picked up children from her neighbor's house, where she babysat for $10 an afternoon, money Claire could barely afford but had to because the alternative was leaving 7- and 5-year-olds alone, which was illegal and dangerous and obviously not an option. How was school? Claire asked with practiced enthusiasm as she drove home. Lily excited about her art project. Owen, quiet as he often was. And Claire listened and made appropriate sounds and pretended not to be calculating how many hours were left. 62 now, less than 3 days. They ate dinner, canned macaroni and cheese, cheap, filling, nutritious enough for children. Even if it wasn't a meal Claire would have chosen if she had options. Then, bath time. Stories. A bedtime routine that Claire had carefully maintained because children needed structure, predictability, especially when everything else was unstable. Good night, babies. Mommy loves you. I love you too, Mommy. They sang in unison, innocent, trusting, believing that Mommy would always keep them safe because she always had. Not knowing that Mommy was spectacularly failing at doing just that. Claire closed their bedroom door. She went to her own room. She sat on the bed. And finally she allowed herself to feel the full weight of the situation. She didn't cry. She was beyond crying. She just sat in the darkness, processing the impossibility of the situation. And she realized with devastating clarity that there was no miracle coming. There was no solution. Thursday was coming. The sheriff was going to show up, and she was going to have to look Lily and Owen in the eye and admit that she had failed. If this part touched you, if you felt the weight she's carrying, the impossibility of the situation, the despair of knowing she's sinking and has no one to ask for help, leave a like so I know. Because stories like Claire's need to be told, they need to be acknowledged. And the more people understand that poverty is not a personal failure, but a systemic failure, the more chance we have to change things. On Tuesday morning, 54 hours remaining, Claire sent the children to school as usual. Then she sat in the empty kitchen, staring at the eviction notice she'd pulled from the drawer. Reading it again as if words might have shifted overnight. They hadn't. It still said Thursday. It still said 10 a.m. It still said Sheriff Michael Torres would execute the order. Specific name. Specific person who would be the face of their displacement. She wondered what kind of person he was. Whether he carried out evictions with cold efficiency or reluctance. Whether he thought about the families he destroyed or if it was just work. Whether he ever questioned the system that ordered children removed from homes because mothers couldn't pay impossible bills. She wouldn't find out until it was too late. Or at least, that's what she thought. Because, in truth, Sheriff Michael Torres already knew her name. He'd already seen her in order. He'd already asked questions that officers normally didn't ask. And he was about to make a choice that would completely change the trajectory of her life. If you want to follow the rest of this story, discover how Claire survived the next 72 hours. Find out what kind of man Sheriff Michael Torres really was, and how a single decision of his changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because what happens when a person in power chooses humanity over protocol is the kind of transformation the system never expects. And that's exactly why it matters. Claire didn't know yet. As she sat there holding the letter, as she counted the hours, as she tried to figure out how she was going to survive the next 3 days. Keeping masks in place, she didn't know that someone was paying attention. That someone had seen her name and recognized it. That someone was about to appear, not as an eviction officer, but as something completely different. Something she didn't expect and didn't know how to process when it finally happened. But it would come. For now, there was only waiting. And a desperate attempt to maintain normalcy for a few more precious hours before everything irreversibly crumbled. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because to truly understand the silent despair Claire carried, the kind that eats you up inside while you smile on the outside, you need to know the journey that brought her to that point. Because nobody wakes up one day and decides, I'm going to lose my house. It's a slow and inevitable process of a system failing, of accumulated impossible choices, of doing everything right and still sinking. And Claire had done everything right. At least, she had tried. Claire Morgan was 33 years old. She should have been in the prime of her adult life, established career, perhaps a solid marriage, thriving children, a bright future. But reality was infinitely more complicated and devastating. She had been divorced for 2 years. And it wasn't one of those divorces where both parties amicably agree that they've grown in different directions and remained friends for the sake of the children. It was abandonment, pure and simple. Derek Morgan, her ex-father of Lily and Owen, had left when Owen was 3 and Lily 5. He simply packed his bags one Tuesday morning and said, I didn't sign for this. This being real fatherhood. Not the Instagram version of fatherhood where you post cute photos and get validation, but the real version where kids wake up at 3 in the morning with nightmares, where they get sick and need to be taken to the doctor, where there are constant, expensive, and exhausting needs, where it requires presence, patience, sacrifice. Derek had liked the idea of being a father. He had even liked the photos him holding newborn babies, smiling at the camera, collecting likes. But reality was hard. And Derek didn't make it hard. So he left. I need to find myself, he had said. As if living in a car required a journey of self-discovery more than children needed a father. He had disappeared to Nevada. Claire vaguely knew why her mutual friend had mentioned seeing him there. Working in construction. living with a new girlfriend, starting a new life, as if his old wife, 2 children, responsibilities, could simply be deleted, like a social media profile that no longer served you. Child support, court-ordered, $500 a month. A generous amount until you realized it covered perhaps a third of the real cost of raising 2 children. And even then, payments were irregular at best, non-existent at worst. Derek sent money when he felt guilty or when his new girlfriend pressured him, but most of the time, nothing. Silence. A legal system to enforce payments. It theoretically existed. Claire could register with the state's child support enforcement agency. They could eventually garnish his wages, seize tax refunds, even revoke his driver's license, or arrest him for disrespect. But the process was slow, bureaucratic, and it required Claire to fill out endless paperwork, attend hearings, possibly hire a lawyer if he contested. Time she didn't have, money she didn't have, emotional energy that was completely depleted. So she gave up pursuing it. She just dealt with it, alone. Claire worked as a shift manager at the Save Mart supermarket on the east side of town. It wasn't the career she'd dreamed of. She'd started community college before Lily was born, studying nursing. But pregnancy had interrupted it. Then marriage, Owen, life, and she never came back. So the supermarket job that had been temporary became permanent. 8 years now, working her way up from cashier to stalker, to supervisor, to shift manager. The title sounded impressive. The reality was managing a team of part-time teenagers while earning marginally more than them. 32 hours a week. Specific number, not an accident. Save Mart, like most large retailers, strategically structured employee schedules. 35 hours was the limit, where federal law mandated they offer full-time benefits, health insurance, paid vacation days, sick leave, so they kept everyone below that. 32 hours. Enough so Claire couldn't easily take on a second job because schedules changed weekly. Not enough to live on. Perfect for the company, disastrous for employees. $11.75 an hour. Approximately $1,500 a month gross. It seemed manageable on paper. After taxes, federal, state, Social Security, Medicare, there was $1,250 left. And then the impossible arithmetic began. Mortgage on the small 3-bedroom house they had bought when Derek was still around, when they were a dual-income family with a bright future. $1,100 a month. That left $150 for literally everything else. Utilities, food, gas, car insurance, clothes for the constantly growing children, school supplies, medical co-pays when someone got sick. Impossible. Mathematically, objectively impossible. Claire had held on for a surprisingly long time through sheer willpower and extra work that was destroying her body and soul. In the first few months after Derek left, she had done everything she could to generate extra income. She cleaned houses on her days off. She charged $25 an hour. She did maybe 10 hours a week when she could get clients. $250 extra. It helped, but it was exhausting. Working an 8-hour shift at the supermarket, picking up the kids, making dinner, putting them to bed, and then leaving at 9 o'clock at night to clean someone's house for 3 hours. Coming back at midnight, sleeping 5 hours, repeating. She also did babysitting. Neighbors who needed a sitter at the last minute. $10 an hour. She'd bring their children to her house. So Lily and Owen had company while she looked after more children. It worked until it didn't. Till one night when she was looking after 4 children, including her own, and one got hurt and the parents threatened to sue, and she realized she was risking everything without liability insurance that she couldn't afford. She sold everything of value. She started with the obvious wedding jewelry Derek hadn't brought. $400 at the pawn shop. An engagement ring that cost $3,000 when he bought it was worth $200 when she sold it. Non-essential furniture. A formal dining table they never used. $300. The living room TV, she kept the small one in the kids' bedroom, sold the large one. 150. Exercise equipment Derek had bought during his get-in-shape phase and used 3 times. 100. Her designer clothes, from when they had money, sold them on consignment. $50 total for things that originally cost $1,000. And for a while, it worked. She kept her mortgage current, bills paid, food on the table, but it was unsustainable. The human body has limits, and Claire was working 60, 70 hours a week, sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, living on coffee and adrenaline. She started making mistakes at work, forgetting to close the cash register correctly, losing inventory. Her boss pulled her aside. "Claire, you need to focus. I can't have a manager who isn't paying attention." As if she chose not to pay attention rather than be exhausted to the bone. And then she started getting sick. Constant colds because her immune system failed. A sinus infection that required antibiotics she couldn't afford, so she was sick for weeks. She missed work, lost hours, lost income. In 1 month, she simply couldn't get a mortgage. First month, Claire called the bank immediately. "I know I'm late, can I pay part now and the rest next week?" The representative was polite. "We'll write it down, but you need to pay the full amount, plus a late fee of $75 by the end of the month to avoid reporting to credit." She paid. Somehow she didn't eat much that week. The children ate. She didn't. The second month was harder. Claire simply didn't have it. She tried to do extra work but couldn't find enough. She called the bank again. This time, the tone was less friendly. "Ms. Morgan, you are developing a pattern. We can discuss loan modification, but you need to apply formally." She applied. Endless paperwork. Proof of income. Proof of hardship. Letter explaining the situation. She waited 6 weeks for a response. Denied insufficient income to qualify for modified payment, so she didn't earn enough to pay her current mortgage, but she also didn't earn enough to qualify for a smaller mortgage. Perfect logic of a broken system. Third month. Fourth. Notices started arriving. Threatening envelopes with legal language. Notice of default. Commencement of execution proceedings. Collection calls. Daily, multiple calls a day. Claire stopped answering the phone because she couldn't bear to hear voices saying the same things repeatedly. "When can you pay? Do you have a plan? Can you borrow from family?" Always the same answers. "I don't know. I don't have one. There's no family." Eventually, execution proceedings moved forward. Legal notices. A court date Claire couldn't miss work to attend, so she missed it by default. Judgment in favor of the bank. And finally, inevitably, an eviction order. All happening with the brutal efficiency of a machine processing default without seeing the person behind it. And through it, all the months of struggle, of extra work, of not sleeping, of not eating, of selling. Everything, of calling the bank, of trying so desperately. Claire kept it all hidden from Lily and Owen. Because how do you explain to a child that the world is unfair? That mommy working more hours than she humanly should is still not enough? That daddy left and the system doesn't force him to help? That they're going to lose their house, not because mommy didn't try, but because the system is structured in a way that people like them fall through cracks? So she pretended. When Owen asked, "Why doesn't daddy call anymore?" she'd say, "Daddy's very busy with his new job, but he loves you very much." A lie. When Lily asked, "Why do we always eat pasta?" Claire called it pasta adventure night. She made it seem like a fun choice. When the electricity was cut off for 2 days because she hadn't paid her bill, she lit candles all over the house and said, "Special candlelit dinner," like a fancy restaurant. The children thought it was magic. When the heating failed in the winter because she couldn't afford propane, she piled up blankets and said, "Let's go indoor camping." She set up a makeshift tent in the living room with sheets. Lily and Owen loved it. They thought it was an adventure. They didn't know it was desperation disguised as creativity. Each little lie building a fragile shield between children and devastating reality. protecting innocence for as long as possible. And Claire told herself she was doing the right thing, that children didn't need to carry the weight of adult problems, that they deserved normalcy. But part of her knew a small voice, deep inside, that she tried to ignore that when the truth finally came out. When the masks finally fell, the impact would be worse for having hidden it for so long. That betraying their trust in this way, no matter how well-intentioned, would have consequences. But she didn't know what else to do. So she kept pretending, and she waited for a miracle, for salvation, for anything that would prevent the inevitable. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the devastating truth about Claire's situation wasn't just that she was sinking it, was that every system, every institution, every person who should have offered some kind of safety net had failed her in such systematic and complete ways that her collapse wasn't a question of if, but when. And the impact of this collective failure wasn't just numbers on legal paperwork. It was a real mother, with 2 real children, about to lose the only home they knew, because literally no one, not corporation, not government, not family, not community, took responsibility to stop it. The bank that held Claire's mortgage was First National Mortgage, a subsidiary of a New York-based financial conglomerate that managed millions of loans across the country. To them, Claire wasn't a person. She was an account number. Default number 847,392. And when she tried desperately, repeatedly, to speak to someone who could help, she discovered there was no someone. There was only a system. Impersonal, inflexible, designed to process cases, not solve human problems. Claire had spent hours on the phone. Literally hours of her life that she would never get back. Held on hold while generic music played and an automated voice periodically assured her that your call is important to us. When she finally connected with a real human, she was immediately transferred. You need to speak to the loan modification department. Transferred. More hold. Actually, you need loss mitigation. Transferred again. That must be foreclosure prevention. More transfers. Endless circles of departments that didn't communicate with each other, and none of which had any real authority to do anything beyond reading scripts. Ms. Morgan, I understand your situation, but company policy dictates. A phrase Claire heard dozens of times, from different representatives, all sounding equally trained, equally powerless. Have you explored all available assistance options? Yes, all of them. Denied. Is there any family that can help financially? No, none. Have you considered selling the house before foreclosure affected your credit? To whom? The house was worth approximately $120,000. She owed $130,000. Underwater. No one was going to buy it unless she brought $10,000 to the table. Money she obviously didn't have if she couldn't afford the monthly mortgage payment. The foreclosure process had moved forward with the brutal efficiency of well-oiled machinery. Legal notices arrived regularly. Thick envelopes. Intimidating letterhead. Language Claire didn't fully understand, but which clearly meant you're losing everything. Court dates were set. Hearings that took place on weekdays at 10 in the morning. Impossible time for Claire, who worked and couldn't simply miss work without losing desperately needed income. She tried once. She asked for time off. It was denied. Tuesday is inventory day. I need you here. So she missed her hearing by default. Judgment was issued in favor of the bank automatically because she wasn't there to defend the case. Not that there was a defense. She owed money. She didn't pay. Contractually, legally, the bank had the right to repossess the property. The facts were simple. That facts didn't tell the whole story, that she had worked herself to the point of literally not being able to work anymore. That the alimony system had failed. That every assistance program had rejected her by absurdly small margins didn't matter to the court. Debt was debt. An eviction order was issued. And now the sheriff was going to execute it. Simple, clean, efficient, devastating. Ex-husband Derek. Claire hadn't spoken to him in 8 months. Their last conversation had been a text message from him saying he was going through a difficult financial time and couldn't send child support that month, or the next month, or any month after that. He'd changed his number after that, blocked her on all social media, profiles deleted or set to private where she couldn't see them. Claire knew through a mutual friend that he was in Nevada, Las Vegas maybe, or Reno, working in construction, living with a new girlfriend who posted pictures of them in bars, at concerts, living a life Derek clearly could afford when he wasn't paying for his children. But exact location, employer's name, current address, unknown. And even if Claire knew, what exactly would she do? Drive to Nevada and confront him? Beg? He had made it clear 2 years ago that he didn't want parental responsibility. Forcing him through the legal system would require hiring a family lawyer, which cost thousands of dollars she didn't have. She could try to represent herself, but interstate child support enforcement cases were complex, took months or years, and even if she won, there was a chance he would simply disappear again to avoid garnishment. Meanwhile, children needed shelter today. Not in 6 months, when the process might result in maybe a payment. Family. The word was almost a joke. Claire's mother, Linda, had died 3 years ago. Massive stroke, 58 years old. A sudden and devastating death that left Claire not only without a mother, but without the only person in the world who had truly cared unconditionally. Linda would have helped. She would have let Claire and the children stay with her. She would have discovered something, but she was dead, and the grave offered no practical help. Claire's father was absent. He had left when she was 14. "I need space," was his explanation for abandoning his wife and daughter. He moved to Florida, remarried, started a new family. Contact with Claire was sporadic afterward, non-existent for the last 10 years. She didn't have his current phone number. She didn't know if he was still alive. And even if he was, what kind of father disappears from his teenage daughters' life and then becomes an option for help 2 decades later? No siblings. Claire was an only child. No close aunts or uncles she had kept in touch with. All grandparents dead. And Derek's family, his parents, his sister, had stayed with Derek in the divorce. Not explicitly, but through silence. They stopped calling. They stopped visiting Lily and Owen. And on the rare occasions when Claire had tried to reach out, "The children miss you. Maybe we can arrange a visit," the responses were cold. Derek said it was very difficult for him. "You must have done something." Clear implication. Claire had caused the marriage to collapse. Therefore, her problems were her fault. No support there. Friends, Claire had had a few, years ago. Before Owen was born. Before the divorce. Before the downward spiral. Jessica, whom she met in a mom's group when Lily was a baby. Sarah, a coworker from her previous job. Amanda, a neighbor who used to have coffee with her. But friendships when you're a single mother, constantly working, always tired, always broken, always canceling plans because you couldn't afford a babysitter, or were working extra shifts, those friendships wither. Not out of cruelty, just life. People have their own problems, their own families, their own struggles, and asking for help, real, substantial help. Not "Can you get me milk from the market?" but "Can I stay on your couch with 2 children indefinitely because I'm about to become homeless?" was a huge request. A request that tested friendship beyond what most were willing or able to endure. Claire had considered it. She had fantasized about calling Jessica and explaining the situation. But what did she say? "Hi, I know we haven't spoken in months, but I'm being evicted on Thursday, and I need a place to stay indefinitely with 2 children. Do you mind?" It was too much. It was taking on too much. So she didn't ask, and silence solidified into isolation. Social services were a cruel joke. Claire had applied for everything there was. SNA, Peace Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Food stamps, should have been obvious. Single mother, to children, minimum income. But her application was denied. Family income exceeds eligibility limit by $23 per month. $23. She earned $1,250 a month. The eligibility limit was $1,227, so she didn't qualify. It didn't matter that after the mortgage she had $150 left for everything. Numbers were just numbers. Housing assistance through a Section 8 program. Applied. Waited 8 weeks for a response. Application accepted. Placed on a waiting list. Estimated time to voucher, 18 to 24 months, 2 years. How did she survive 2 years? Temporary family shelters. Called everyone in the county. Full waiting list. Try again next month. Always next month. Never now. Never when you really needed it. TANF. Temporary assistance for needy families. Cash. Assistance denied. You're employed for a substantial amount of time. TANF is for families without income. But her income wasn't enough. Then you need to find a better paying job. How? With what skills? With what time when she was already working 32 hours a week and raising 2 children alone? There are vocational training programs, which took months, demanded time she didn't have, and didn't pay bills while she trained. A perfect circle of impossible logic. There was no safety net. There was an illusion of a safety net. Programs that existed on paper but had such narrow eligibility criteria that most people who needed help didn't qualify, or that had such long waiting lists that help arrived years too late. And meanwhile, people like Claire fell through the cracks. Freefall disguised as case management and application processing, and the city, the surrounding community, nobody knew. Claire had become invisible in the way that people on the edge of poverty often do. She was the person you saw at the supermarket, scanning your purchases but never really saw. A familiar face, but no name. Present but unnoticed. Nobody asked questions. Coworkers saw that she always looked tired, but tiredness was normal in retail work. Nobody noticed that Lily and Owen's clothes were getting too small to worn. Or if they did notice, they didn't say anything because it was rude to comment on other people's financial circumstances. Nobody asked why Claire always brought lunch or didn't eat, because it was her choice. The social system was designed for privacy. And privacy, when you're struggling, easily becomes isolation. Claire could have asked for help publicly. She could have posted on Facebook, explaining the situation, created a GoFundMe, asked the local church, even though she wasn't religious. But pride, stupid, self-destructive, completely human, pride wouldn't allow it. Why admit publicly that she was failing, that she couldn't provide, that she needed charity? It was too deep a shame. So she suffered in silence, and nobody saw, until it was too late to matter. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moment when Sheriff Michael Torres truly paid attention, not with the professional detachment of an officer carrying out orders, but with the human recognition that he was about to carry out an eviction on a family he knew, on a child who was a friend of his daughter, was the kind of moment that defines character. It's easy to carry out orders when victims are anonymous, when they're just numbers on paper. But when you know the name, when you know that 7-year-old Lily Morgan is going to lose her home, that changes everything. And Michael Torres, to his credit, couldn't simply follow protocol and ignore discomfort. Sheriff Michael Torres was 40 years old and had 17 years in law enforcement. He had started as a patrolman at 23, right after college. He worked his way up through detective, sergeant, and finally elected sheriff at 37. It was work he took seriously. A badge meant something to him. It wasn't just authority, it was responsibility. Protecting the community, enforcing the law. But also, and this was a part most of his colleagues forgot, serving vulnerable people. And sometimes, serving meant questioning orders that were legal, but not necessarily just. He had carried out evictions before. Part of the work he viscerally hated, but which was legally mandatory when a judge issued an order. He couldn't simply decide not to do it because he disagreed. That would be an abuse of power in the opposite direction. So, he did it. He showed up with a court order. He knocked on the door. He gave people time to gather essential belongings, if they hadn't left yet. and he watched with discomfort that never lessened, no matter how many times he did. Ita's lives were dismantled. Furniture on the sidewalk, children crying, adults in shock or anger or defeated acceptance. Sad, but inevitable, he told himself. The system working as designed. So when the order for 428 Maple Street landed on his desk Tuesday morning, standard paperwork. Eviction scheduled for Thursday at 10 a.m., family with minors present, use of force authorized if necessary. He initially didn't think much of it. He signed an acknowledgement. He added it to his to-do list for the week. Just one more. But something made him pause. He picked up the paperwork again, looked at a name, Claire Morgan, and 2 minors, Lily Morgan, 7, Owen Morgan, 5, Lily Morgan. He knew that name. He knew it. It took a minute for his mind to connect the dots, and then he remembered. Lily Morgan was in first grade at Meadowbrook Elementary. Same school, same grade as his daughter, Sophie. They were friends. Not necessarily best friends, but friends. They played together in the playground. Sophie had mentioned her several times. And then Michael remembered more. Sophie's birthday party. 6 months ago, 7 years old. They'd held it in a local park because the house was too small for 20 hyperactive children. And Lily had come with her mother, Claire. Michael remembered her now. A quiet, polite woman who had arrived exactly on time and left exactly when the party ended. She'd brought Sophie a present, not expensive, Michael remembered thinking, but thoughtful. An art book with colored pencils. Sophie had liked it. Claire had stayed on the sidelines most of the time, watching Lily play but not interacting much with the other parents. And Michael, busy managing the chaos of 27-year-olds, hadn't given it much thought at the time. But now, looking at her name on the eviction notice, he thought, Sophie had mentioned Lily several times since then. Lily is so nice, Dad. She always shares her lunch with me at lunchtime, even when she only has a little. Michael had thought at the time that it was kind, childlike generosity. But now, with the context of an eviction notice in front of him, of a family clearly in deep financial crisis, he wondered, did Lily share because she was naturally generous, or because she had learned too early that sharing the little she had was a way to make friends when she had nothing else to offer? What kindness could compensate for clothes that didn't fit right or school supplies that were older than other children's? And how much food did she really have? If she was constantly sharing, did that mean she had enough to share? Or was she giving away her own food and starving herself because that's what she'd learned to do at home? Watch her mother feed the children and not eat herself. Michael felt a clench in his stomach. Discomfort that went beyond just another sad eviction. This was a child his daughter knew, a child he played with, a child who was going to lose her home. And suddenly, she wasn't anonymous anymore. Michael picked up the phone. He called the bank that had issued the order, First National Mortgage. He was transferred 3 times before finally connecting with someone in the foreclosure department. Can I speak to someone about a specific foreclosure case? Account number 847,392. I want to confirm that all assistance options have been fully explored before proceeding with eviction where minors are involved. Trying to sound professional, official, not revealing that he knew the family. The representative, middle-aged man, with a weary voice from handling too many cases, was polite but firm. Sheriff Torres, we appreciate your concern for the community. But I can assure you that a court order was properly issued through all legal channels. The mortgage owner attempted to work with the tenant for multiple months, offered loan modification. She was unable to maintain even the modified payments. At this point, we have a legal right and a fiduciary obligation to investors to repossess the property. She has 2 young children, Michael said, trying to appeal to humanity. 7 and 5 years old. Do you know where they'll go when you carry out the eviction? Have you checked if there's an alternative housing plan? Sheriff, with all due respect, that's not our responsibility. Our responsibility is to our investors who own this asset. Besides, the tenant had months to make arrangements. If she chose not to, we can't be held responsible for her poor planning. Surely, as a law enforcement officer, you understand the distinction between personal sympathy and legal obligation. Michael understood. He understood perfectly. And it was exactly this kind of thinking, not our problem. Responsibility is for investors, not people. She had time to make arrangements that created situations where children ended up literally homeless. Because everyone in the system assumed it was someone else's problem. The bank assumed Claire would make arrangements. Social services assumed the bank would offer assistance. The community assumed the family would take care of them. And in the end, nobody did anything and the child slept in the car. Understood, Michael said. His tone was cold now. I will carry out the order as instructed, and he hung up. He sat at the desk for a long moment, looking at the paperwork, thinking he could just carry out Order 5. Show up at 10 a.m. with the appropriate documentation. Knock on the door. If Claire and the children were still there, give them 30 minutes to gather essential belongings, and then force their way out. Lock the house. Hand the keys to the bank representative. Job done. Legal. Appropriate, and absolutely devastating for the family who had nowhere to go, or he could do something that wasn't strictly necessary, something that went beyond official duty. But his instinct honed by 17 years of being a police officer, of discerning when situations were what they seemed versus when there was more to it, told him he should do it. He could make a preliminary visit, check the situation, see if there was anything that could be done to mitigate the impending disaster. Decision made. 3 days before the scheduled eviction, Tuesday afternoon, Michael drove to 428 Maple Street. Not in an official vehicle, his personal car. Because this wasn't an official visit yet. It was verification, reconnaissance. He arrived at the address. Small house. Ranch style. 1 story. Probably built in the 70s. Faded blue paint peeling at the corners. Roof that looked like it needed work. But the lawn was mowed. Small flowers planted around the mailbox. Old Cara Honda Civic that had seen better days in the driveway. Signs that someone was trying to keep the house even with limited resources. Michael parked on the street. He walked to the door and knocked. He waited. He heard sounds inside TV, approaching footsteps. And then the door opened, and Claire Morgan was there. And Michael immediately saw what he expected to see, but hoped not to see. A woman on the absolute edge, desperately trying to maintain the appearance that everything was all right. She was in her early 30s but looked older. Tired in a way that went beyond bad sleep. The kind of tiredness that comes from carrying impossible weight for too long. Hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup. Clean but worn clothes. And her eyes, God. Her eyes carried a kind of tension that Michael recognized from years of work. Fear. Barely concealed despair. An attempt to appear normal when everything was falling apart. Can I help you? Claire asked. Her voice was polite, but cautious. And then her eyes registered his uniform, because he had come in uniform, his insignia visible. And she saw fear cross her expression. Real, tangible fear. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the event that truly connected Claire and Michael, that transformed him from an enforcer of lawful orders into an unexpected ally, that forced her to confront a truth she had so carefully hidden, happened in those critical minutes on the balcony. It was a moment where masks fell, where vulnerability was forced, not by choice, but by circumstance, and where decisions were made that would reverberate through everything that came after. And it was a moment of mutual recognition. He seeing humanity where the system saw only noncompliance. She seeing compassion where she expected only cold authority. Claire opened the door, expecting a Jehovah's Witness trying to save her soul. Or a salesman trying to sell her something she couldn't afford. She found Sheriff in full uniform. Khaki shirt with a bright gold badge on the chest. Name engraved, M. Torres. Black gun and a holster on his hip. serious, but not aggressive expression. And all the blood drained from her face. She literally felt it happen. Momentary dizziness. Heart racing to a rhythm that was almost panic. Because sheriff at the door could only mean one thing: eviction. But it couldn't be. The letter said farm. Today was Tuesday. 72 hours still. Unless I had read it wrong. Unless the date had changed and nobody told her. Unless it was today and Lily and Owen were inside watching TV and were going to see Mom being forced out of the house. Mrs. Morgan. His voice broke the spiral of panic. Professional, but not harsh. Not the tone she imagined an officer would use when carrying out an eviction. Yes, she managed to say, dry mouth, hands trembling slightly, but she kept them at her sides too. Hide it. I am Claire Morgan. Confirming her identity, even though he obviously already knew. He was at her door, with paperwork that certainly had her name on it. Sheriff Michael Torres, he introduced himself. I'm sorry to bother you. May I come in? I need to discuss an eviction order scheduled for Thursday. Thursday, not today. Relief washed over her so intensely that her knees almost buckled. There was still time, but he knew. Of course he knew. It was his job to execute. He was there to, check the situation. Make sure she knew the eviction was coming. Warn her in advance for some reason. Claire instinctively glanced back. Through the half-open door, she could see into the living room. Lily was sitting on the sofa, legs crossed, watching some show on Netflix. Owen was on the floor, with toys scattered around him, completely oblivious. They couldn't hear any conversation at the door. But if the sheriff came in, if there was an official conversation inside the house, they would notice, they would ask questions. Can we talk on the porch? Claire asked, her voice low, urgent. The children are inside and they don't know about the eviction. Not yet. Michael nodded, understanding immediately without her needing to explain further. Sure, this is fine. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. Claire stepped out. She closed the door behind her carefully, making sure it was completely closed so no sounds would escape. And she faced him, arms crossed, defensively across her chest, bracing herself for whatever came next. I know about the eviction, she said before he could speak, trying to take control of the conversation. I received notice. I know it's Thursday, and I'm dealing with it. A lie. A complete lie. But what else was she saying? Admitting that she had no plan, that she had nowhere to go, that she was completely lost. How are you coping? Michael asked. His tone wasn't accusatory. It wasn't prove to me you're coping. It was genuinely curious, as if he really wanted to know, as if the answer mattered. I have a plan, Claire said. Another lie, but more elaborate. I'll sort it out before Thursday. I have a few options I'm exploring. It just needs a few more days. Vaguely, without specifying because there were no specifics. There were no options. There was no plan. Mrs. Morgan, Claire, she interrupted. If they were going to have a conversation, she could at least use a first name. It made it seem less like an authority interrogating a citizen. Claire, he corrected. I'm not here to judge you. And I'm not here to officially execute anything yet. This is Thursday. I'm here because, he paused, choosing his words carefully. My daughter is friends with your daughter, Sophie and Lily. They're in the same grade. They play together. Claire blinked. She hadn't expected this. You're Sophie, Torres's father. A memory resurfaced. A birthday party months ago. A sweet girl with a big smile. A father who had organized everything so carefully. Who had been kind when Lily spilled juice. Yes. And because I know who you are, because our daughters are friends, I can't just show up on Thursday and carry out orders without at least checking the situation. Because part of my job on Thursday will be to remove you and your children from this house, if there's no alternative. And I need to know, do you have somewhere to go? A direct question, cutting through all the evasions. It deserved a direct answer. Claire looked at him, really looked. Saw an unofficial doing his duty, but a person. a father, someone who genuinely seemed to care about the answer, and something in her, maybe exhaustion from maintaining lies, maybe desperation at having someone finally ask, maybe just the impact of being broke. No, she admitted, the hardest word she'd ever said. I have no family. My parents are dead or missing. My ex-husband disappeared. I don't have close enough friends to ask for shelter. I don't have money for a rent deposit elsewhere. Everything I earn goes to basic bills, and even that isn't enough. Temporary shelters for families are all full waiting lists. So no, I have nowhere to go. I planned, I don't know, to stay in the car, I guess. Until I found something out. In the car, Michael repeated. Not judgment, just processing. With a 7 and a 5-year-old. In March, when it's still cold at night, I have no choice, Claire said, her voice breaking now. Barriers crumbling. I did everything I could. I worked. I applied for assistance. I tried to modify my loan. I sold everything of value. And it still wasn't enough. So yes, a car. Because what's the alternative? Sleeping on the street. And do the children know? Michael asked gently. Do they know this is happening? Claire shook her head. No. They don't know we're going to lose our house. They don't know I've completely failed to keep them safe. They don't know that in 2 days they won't have their own rooms or beds or normalcy. I planned to tell them the night before, Wednesday night, to give them at least a few more days of normalcy before the world falls apart. But maybe that's cruel. Maybe I should tell them now. I don't know. I don't know which choice is less traumatic. I don't know what I'm doing. She was crying now. She hadn't realized when it started, but tears were streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. I didn't mean to. This is embarrassing. It's not, Michael said firmly. It's human. You're in an impossible situation, and nobody should have to go through this alone. He was quiet for a moment. And then, you can't tell them the night before. It will traumatize them. Waking up on a Tuesday and being told, pack your things, we're sleeping in the car tonight. No time to process, to ask questions, to prepare emotionally. That creates lasting trauma. Believe me, I've seen it. So what do I do? Claire asked. Pure desperation now. How do I tell them? When? How do I do it in a way that doesn't destroy them? You don't do it alone, Michael said. You need a real plan. Not maybe figure something out. Real, and you need help. Let me see what I can do. Give me until tomorrow. I'll see if there are resources you haven't explored. Options that maybe the bank didn't mention. Anything. Why? Claire asked. Suspicious because she'd learned that help always came with a price. Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why risk involvement when you could just execute Order 5 and move on? Because it's right, Michael said. Simple, straightforward, and because nobody should go through this alone, especially not with children. Especially not when the system fails so spectacularly that a working mother can lose her home because her ex ran away from responsibility and nobody forces him to pay. That's not fair. And yes, I know the world isn't fair. But when can I do something about a specific injustice? I do. He paused. Give me your phone number. I'll call tomorrow, and we'll figure something out. Okay. Claire gave him a number. Because what choice did she have? And for the first time in 2 years, since the divorce, since the beginning of the downward spiral, since realizing she was completely alone, she felt something beyond despair. She felt hope, small, fragile as glass, on the verge of shattering at the lightest touch, but present. Maybe he could find something she had lost. Maybe there was a dark plan she didn't know about. Maybe she didn't dare hope too much, but she hoped a little. And at that moment, a little was all she had. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened the day after that conversation on the porch wasn't just Michael offering a practical solution. It was a moment where Claire was forced to confront the full magnitude of the danger she faced, not just losing her home, but potentially losing her children. And it was a moment where Michael had to make a decision. that went beyond momentary compassion and entered territory of real commitment, of personal risk, of a choice that would fundamentally alter his life. Because helping someone with $100 is one thing. Inviting them to live in your house, that's something else entirely. Michael returned Wednesday morning, one day before the eviction, 48 hours remaining. But this time, he wasn't in uniform. Civilian clothes, jeans, casual button-down shirt, as if he were a friend visiting, not an officer on a mission. He knocked on the door at 9:15. Claire answered, surprised to see him again so early. Sheriff Torres. I wasn't expecting this. Michael, he corrected. And we need to talk. Seriously. Do you have time? Looking past her to check if any children were nearby. Lily and Owen are at school, Claire said. They won't be back until 3. Good privacy. He went inside as she stepped back. The house was small inside, just as it looked from the outside. A living room that, combined with a dining area, a kitchen visible through a passageway, a hallway that presumably led to bedrooms. The furniture was modest but clean. Pictures of Lily and Owen on the walls. Signs of family life even under obvious financial stress. Michael placed a file folder on the coffee table. Paperwork. I spent last night and this morning thoroughly researching your situation. I spoke with the bank again. I called social services as a hypothetical check. And I have bad news and worse news. Claire sat down, bracing herself. Bad news. The bank will not negotiate. Period. Eviction will take place Thursday at 10 a.m. as scheduled. You have until then to leave voluntarily with your dignity intact. Or I am legally obligated to physically remove you and the children, put your belongings on the sidewalk, and lock the house. No extensions, no last-minute options. It's over. Claire nodded. I knew that. And worse news. Without a permanent address, Child Protective Services can intervene automatically, Michael said. His tone was serious, looking directly into her eyes to ensure he understood the gravity of the situation. Homeless families with minors trigger an automatic investigation. Standard protocol. They send a social worker to assess whether you can provide a safe and suitable environment for the children. And if they determine that you can't, he let the implication hang, heavy, threatening. They'll take my children away, Claire finished, her voice completely empty, drained of emotion because she had already processed this fear 1,000 times in the last 72 hours. Exactly, Michael confirmed. It's a possibility, not a certainty. It depends on the specific social worker, how you present the situation, whether you demonstrate a plan to stabilize things. But it's a very real risk. And even if they don't take them away immediately, there are secondary problems. He opened the folder. He showed the documentation. Living in a car or temporary shelter with 2 children creates a cascade of problems. First, school. Lily will start missing school because there's no stable address. Because you're moving between places. Because the logistics of getting her and Owen to school every morning when living in a car is impossible. Absences trigger a truancy officer, which triggers further investigations. Second, health. Children living in a car. In early spring when nights are still cold, higher risk of illness. And without an address, access to medical care becomes complicated. Third, you. Your job will find out. You'll start to seem less functional. Performance will drop. Manager will question you, potentially fire you, which eliminates your only source of income. Downward spiral. Fast, brutal, inevitable. Claire was trembling now, not visibly, but internally. Every word Michael said confirmed nightmares she'd been having. So what do I do? She asked, not rhetorically. A real, desperate question. Tell me, because I've applied to everything. Every program exists. They've all been denied or have waiting lists months long. I've called every apartment I could find. Nobody will rent to me without a first month's rent, a last month's rent, a security deposit, $3,000 minimum. I don't have it. I can't borrow because my credit has been destroyed by foreclosure. Credit cards all maxed out or canceled. Family doesn't exist. Friends aren't close enough to ask, can I live with you indefinitely, with 2 children? So tell me, what exactly do I do? Michael took a deep breath. This was the point where he crossed the line, where he went from concerned officer to someone personally invested in a way that complicated everything. Do you accept help? He said. Simple, direct. I have a guest room in my house. Technically, tomb. My daughter Sophie uses one. The other is storage at the moment. I can clean it. Put up beds. You and the children can stay there temporarily while you figure out your next steps. Weeks, months, however long you need to get settled in and find your own place. Claire looked at him as if she'd grown a second head. Literally, her mouth was agape, processing words but unable to make sense of them. You. What? I'm offering temporary accommodation, Michael repeated, maintaining a casual tone as if it weren't a huge offer. You, Lily, and Owen. In the guest room. Until you get financially stable and find your own apartment. You don't even know me, Claire said. The first objection her mind processed. You met me yesterday. We talked for 15 minutes. And now you're offering housing for me and my children. Why? What do you want in return? Suspicion, because she had learned through years of hard experience that nobody offered something for nothing. I don't want anything in return, Michael said firmly. It's not a transaction, it's help. And I know enough. I know you're working. That you tried everything to avoid this. That you love your children enough to lie to them about how bad the situation is to protect their innocence. That speaks to my character. And as for why, because it's right, and because it's practical. You need a place. I have a place. Simple. Nothing is simple, Claire said, shaking her head. What if people talk? Small town. Everyone knows everyone. Sheriff living with a single mother. What will people think? What will they say? How does this affect you? Your job? Your reputation? Let them talk, Michael said, Tom indicating that he had considered it and decided it didn't matter. My main concern is ensuring that 2 innocent children don't end up traumatized by a system that failed their family. Or worse, placed in foster care because their mother can't provide temporary housing. Compared to that, gossip is irrelevant. Secondary, I don't care. But you should, Claire insisted. You're a public figure, elected. If your reputation suffers, your job suffers, I can't. I don't want to be responsible for ruining the life of someone you're trying to help. You won't ruin anything, Michael said. And look, I'll be honest. Yes, there will be gossip. People will make assumptions. Some appropriate, some not. My ex-wife already questioned the judgment, said it seemed inappropriate. But in the end, conscience matters more than public opinion. And I can sleep at night knowing I did the right thing more than I can sleep knowing I stood by while a child my daughter knows ended up homeless. Claire wanted to refuse. Every instinct wanted pride, shame at needing charity, fear of owing someone, distrust of motives screamed at her to refuse. To say thank you, but I'll figure it out on my own. But reality screamed louder. The reality that in 24 hours, she would literally be on the street with 2 children. The reality that losing her home was only the beginning of a spiral that would end with losing her children. The reality that this was literally her only option between her and complete catastrophe. How long? Claire asked, small voice, defeated. You say, temporarily. What does that mean? Weeks, months, as long as you need, Michael said. Weeks, months, until you can save up for a deposit on your own place, until your finances stabilize, until you feel ready. There's no time limit, there's no rush. It was an impossible offer, too generous to be real. There had to be a catch, a hidden expectation, something. And what do you expect in return? Claire asked. She needed to know honestly. No BS. What do you want from me? Nothing, Michael said. Seriously, it's not a transaction. If you feel more comfortable contributing to groceries or utilities, We can discuss that when you're more stable, but it's not a requirement. Just living there, taking care of the children, figuring out next steps. That's all. That doesn't make sense, Claire said. People don't do that. They don't offer free housing to strangers. I'm not a person, Michael said. And you're not a stranger. You're the mother of my daughter's friend. You're a person in crisis who needs help and whom I have the resources to help. Simple as that. It wasn't simple. Claire knew, but she also knew she had no choice. I accept, she whispered. The words came out with difficulty because they meant admitting complete defeat, total dependence. But on one condition, we pay our share. Somehow, contribute what I can, and when I can, I leave. I find my own place. This is temporary, not permanent. I need to know there's a way out, that I won't be trapped being eternal charity. Absolutely, Michael agreed. Temporary, bridge, not a destination. And we'll figure out the contribution later when you're stable and can think clearly. Now, let's focus on the immediate. Get you out of here before Thursday. Pack, move, make the transition as smooth as possible for the children. Okay, Claire nodded. She didn't trust her voice to speak, because she had just agreed to move her family to the home of a man she met 48 hours ago. It was insane, desperate, and absolutely necessary. And she didn't know whether she should feel relief or terror. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the moral dilemma Michael faced wasn't a simple, obvious decision between right and wrong. It was a choice, fraught with professional, personal, and social risks that could explode in multiple ways. And before fully committing, he had to sit down with himself and honestly examine not only practical consequences, but deep motivations. Because helping someone because it's the right thing to do is one thing, but helping someone in a way that potentially ruins your own life, that requires a different kind of courage and a different kind of honesty with yourself about why you're really doing it. Michael knew he was crossing lines. Big lines, not legally, nothing illegal about offering temporary housing to someone in crisis. People did it all the time. Friends helped friends, family helped family. But Claire wasn't a friend. She wasn't family. She was basically a stranger he'd met 48 hours ago. And context mattered. He was sheriff, a public figure, an elected county official serving a population of 35,000, a face that appeared in the local newspaper, a name everyone knew. And he was offering housing to a young, attractive single mother. Not that it should matter, but he knew it would. Two people making judgments with two children. It was going to seem strange, potentially very inappropriate. Colleagues were going to question the judgment. Michael could already imagine conversations at the police station. Did you hear? Torres brought that woman from the eviction to live with him. Seriously? The one with the children? Yes, living in his house, with his daughter there. That seems, don't know, strange. Definitely strange. And whispers would turn into speculation. Maybe there's something going on there. Do you think he and she? I don't know. But why else would you bring a stranger to live with you? And even if nothing inappropriate was happening, and it wasn't, perception would become reality in people's minds. The community would make assumptions. Small town where everyone knew everyone, and gossip traveled at the speed of text messages. Have you heard about Sheriff Torres? No. What? He has a woman living with him now. Apparently she was evicted, and he took her. Wow. Is that kind? Or strange? I don't know. It depends on what's really going on there. And speculation would grow. Because people always assumed the worst. Always looked for hidden motives. Nobody believed in pure altruism. There had to be an agenda. Sexual expectation. Something. And then there was Linda, his ex-wife. They had divorced 3 years earlier after a 10-year marriage that had been good at first, but gradually worn down under the stress of conflicting schedules. Him working long hours as a newly elected sheriff, her building a career as a nurse, and fundamental differences about what they wanted from life that hadn't been. apparent when they were young, but had become impossible to ignore when they reached their 30s. The divorce had been relatively amicable. No betrayal, no explosive drama, just mutual recognition that they no longer worked as a couple, and they had co-parented Sophie well since then. Shared schedules, decent communication, respect for each other's boundaries. But Linda had strong opinions, especially about what was appropriate around Sophie. And when Michael called her because he had to call, because Sophie was going to be in the same house as Claire and the children, and Linda deserved to know, her reaction was not positive. "What are you going to do?" Linda had said, her voice rising immediately. "Bring a stranger and her children to live with you, with our daughter there." "Lily is Sophie's friend," Michael explained, keeping his voice calm, rational. "They're in the same grade. They play together, and their family needs help. They're being evicted tomorrow. They have nowhere to go, so they go to shelters, or they apply for assistance. It's not your problem, Michael. Shelters are full. Assistance has a waiting list of months. And meanwhile, 2 children sleep in a car. In March, when it's still freezing. At night, how is that not a problem when I have the resources to help? Because you're sheriff, not a social worker. It's not your job to save everyone." Clear frustration in his voice. "I'm human first," Michael said. "And when I see injustice that I can correct, I will correct it. I have a spare room. They need space. It's simple." "It's not simple," Linda almost shouted. "What if she has an agenda? What if she's manipulating you? Young, attractive, desperate woman. And you show up as a savior. Michael, you're smart. Do you see what this looks like?" "She's not manipulating me," Michael said firmly. "I saw all the paperwork. The eviction order is legitimate. She works full-time at Save Martits, been verified and still can't pay her bills because her ex-husband disappeared. He doesn't pay child support, and the system completely failed her. She applied for every assistance program out there. They all denied her, or have impossible waiting lists. It's not manipulation. It's a real crisis. Then she'll find another place. With what money? No deposit, no credit because the foreclosure destroyed it. Be realistic, Linda. Silence on the line. Then, this is going to look bad. For you professionally, for Sophie, socially. People will talk, they'll make assumptions, and you know they will. Let them talk, Michael said. Though part of him, the part that cared about reputation, about what colleagues thought, about how the community viewed him, shrunk back uncomfortably. Conscience matters more than gossip. And Sophie, Linda pressed. Have you thought about how this affects her? Strangers and strange children living in her house, invading her space, creating an awkward situation that her colleagues will question. Sophie is already friends with Lily, Michael said. This won't be awkward. It'll be like an extended sleepover. And Sophie is a compassionate child. She'll understand that we're helping a family in need. The call ended without resolution. Linda disagreed. She didn't give her blessing. But she also didn't say she was going to try to block it legally, which Michael took as reluctant acceptance. And after he hung up, he sat in his kitchen for a long time. Just sat, processing. Because Linda had raised valid points. Points he couldn't simply dismiss because they were inconvenient. It would look bad. Professionally, socially, there was a real risk that his reputation would suffer, that people would make assumptions about his motives, that gossip would become a problem affecting his effectiveness as sheriff. Because if the community didn't trust him, if colleagues questioned his judgment, how could he do work that required trust? And there was a deeper question that Michael had been avoiding examining closely. Why was he really doing this? He had told himself and Linda and Claire that it was because it was right, because he had resources and saw injustice and could help. And that was true. But was it entirely true? Michael had been alone for 3 years since the divorce. Occasional dates, but nothing serious. Most of the time, he just worked and spent time with Sophie during the weeks he had custody. Life was functional, but empty in ways he didn't usually admit. A large, quiet house when Sophie was with Linda. Dinners alone. Nights watching TV that he didn't really care about, just to fill time. Loneliness that had become so normal that he forgot what it was like to feel anything else. And Claire. Claire was an attractive woman. He couldn't deny that. Even exhausted, stressed, at the worst moment of her life, there was something about her strength, vulnerability, the way she loved children so fiercely that resonated. So part of him, a small part he didn't want to examine too closely, was offering help because he subconsciously saw the possibility of connection, of companionship, of instant family that would fill a void in his life. If so, that was deeply problematic. Because Claire was vulnerable, desperate, dependent. If he was offering help with hidden, even unconscious, expectations, it was exploitation. It was an abuse of power. And that was exactly the kind of thing Linda was worried about. Michael forced himself to examine his motivations honestly. And he decided, yes, there was an element of loneliness. Yes, part of him appreciated the idea of a house full of children, of shared dinners, of a life beyond work. But it wasn't about a potential romance with Claire. Not really. It was about doing the right thing, even when it complicated life. It was about being the kind of man his father had taught him to be. His father had been a police officer, 25 years of service, and he had taught Michael from a young age that a badge came with responsibility. Law isn't always justice, his father had said more than once. The system doesn't always work the way it should. And when you see failure, when you see a good person being crushed by circumstances beyond your control, you have to decide what kind of man you want to be. The kind who hides behind "it's not my problem," or the kind who does something even when it's difficult. Michael had decided. He was going to be the kind of person who helped, whatever the consequences. If his reputation suffered, he would deal with it. If colleagues questioned his judgment, he would explain. If gossip spread, he would ignore it. Because the alternative, carrying out an eviction on Thursday, forcing Claire, Lily, and Owen onto the street, watching them disintegrate, possibly losing custody when social services intervened, was unacceptable. He couldn't do that. Not when he had the power to stop it. Not when he knew it was an avoidable injustice. So, he was going to offer housing. And he was going to set clear boundaries. No expectations. No pressure. Just safe space, while Claire figured out her next steps. And if it complicated his life, it was worth it. Because sleeping at night, knowing he had done the right thing, was worth more than the approval of people who would judge without understanding. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because the transformation that occurred in the months following Claire and the children's move into Michael's house wasn't instantaneous or dramatic like a Hollywood movie would make it seem. It was gradual. It was built in small moments of accumulated trust. It was an uncomfortable journey of two people learning to exist in the same space, navigating boundaries, confronting vulnerabilities, and slowly, so slowly, that they didn't even realize it was happening. Until it had already happened, beginning to recognize in each other something they had both lost. Not just practical help, but real human connection. Claire and the kids moved out on Wednesday, 24 hours before the scheduled eviction. Michael showed up at 8 in the morning with a pickup truck borrowed from a colleague. Claire had spent the previous night packing their entire lives, and she discovered that when you really examine what matters versus what is just stuff, life surprisingly fits into a small space. Clothes, the children's favorite toys, photos, important documents, a few pots and pans that had sentimental value. That was all. It fit in her Honda and Michael's pickup truck on a trip. The furniture stayed. The dining table where they had eaten 1,000 meals. The sofa where he had held children during storms. The beds where Lily and Owen had slept their whole lives. Everything stayed because the bank was going to auction it off with the house, and because Michael had said, "I have furniture. You don't need to bring it. Just personal things." And Claire had felt a strange relief. Because leaving furniture behind meant leaving behind pieces of life you had failed at. Starting clean, even if clean, meant complete dependence on the generosity of a stranger. When they arrived at Michael's house, a one-story ranch house in a pleasant neighborhood, with mature trees and manicured lawns, Lily was immediately charmed. "It's like a hotel," she said, wide eyes scanning the room. The house was bigger than theirs, newer, better maintained. It had a 2-car garage and a backyard with a swing. Owen was quieter, holding Claire's hand, processing the change of form the way 5-year-olds do, with a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Michael showed her the guest room. He had cleaned it the day before. 2 twin beds he had bought used, a dresser, a small wardrobe, a window overlooking the patio. Simple but functional. "Lily, do you want this bed or that one?" he asked, giving her a choice. Lily chose the one by the window. Owen took the other one by default, and they began unpacking their small things while Claire watched with an expression Michael couldn't quite read. Relief, gratitude, shame, probably a mix of all of them. "Children, this is temporary," Claire said. Her tone was firm, making sure they understood. "We'll find our own place. Soon as Mom saves enough money." "No rush," Michael said, looking not at the children but at Claire, trying to communicate that his words were genuine, not just politeness. "Just settle in. Make yourselves at home." But making yourselves at home took time. A lot of time. The first few weeks were strange, uncomfortable in ways that were expected but still difficult to navigate. Claire deliberately kept her distance, excessively polite in a way that created a barrier. "Thank you for letting me use the kitchen. Can I wash your clothes with ours?" "Sorry." Owen made a mess in the living room, as if she were a hotel guest, not someone temporarily living in a shared house. "You don't need to thank me every time you use the kitchen," Michael said after the 10th time, gentle but firm. "It's your home too. Temporarily, yes, but still home. Not a hotel. You live here, kitchen, living room, everything. You just exist. Please." Claire nodded but didn't immediately change her behavior, because saying thank you was armor. It was a way of reminding herself and Michael that she wasn't taking it for granted, that she was grateful, that she hadn't forgotten she was there out of charity. She cooked for everyone. She insisted on it. "Let me make dinner. It's the least I can do." And she made careful meals with ingredients Michael bought. She refused to let him buy everything alone. She always insisted on contributing. "I can pay $50 this week for groceries," even though $50 was a significant portion of her budget. Michael tried to refuse. "Claire, you don't need to." "I do," she interrupted. "Please, let me contribute something." She cleaned obsessively. The house was already clean. Michael wasn't sloppy, but Claire took it to another level. She vacuumed daily. She cleaned the bathrooms she and the children used until they shone. She organized the living room, as if proving her worth. As if the amount of cleaning she did was proportional to how much she deserved to be there. Michael gently tried to make her relax. "Claire, you're not a maid. You don't need to clean compulsively. Just live. Relax." But it took time. Months before she stopped treating each day like an audition to stay. But through it all, the children thrived in ways that were impossible to ignore. Lily and Sophie, already friends, became inseparable. Best friends under the same roof. They had sleepovers in each other's rooms. They did homework together. They invented elaborate games. And Lily, who had been quiet at school, anxious, the kind of child teachers noticed was carrying weight, began to open up, to laugh more. Being a 7-year-old was supposed to be. Owen began to open up as well. In the early days, he had been shy, clinging to Claire, speaking only when spoken to. But gradually, he began to play with Sophie's toys, to laugh when Michael made silly jokes, to ask Mr. Michael to push him on the swing. And eventually, just Michael, and a small voice saying, "Michael, can you read a story?" melted Michael's heart every time. And Claire began to notice things about Michael, little things that accumulated into a bigger impression. How he woke up at 6 every morning and made coffee. Always left an extra mug for her. Never mentioned it, just left it there. how he read to Sophie every night before bed, their ritual, and how, when Owen timidly asked if Michael could read to him too, Michael didn't hesitate. Sure, champ, choose a book. How patient he was when Owen spilled grape juice on the living room carpet in accident that made Claire panic, start apologizing profusely, offer to pay for cleaning. And Michael just said, accidents happen. It's just the carpet, and cleaned it without drama. Because he never not once made Claire feel like she was receiving charity. He never threw his help in her face. He never made passive-aggressive comments about living for free or she should be grateful. He simply existed around them, as if the arrangement were completely normal. And Michael noticed Claire, how she was with children. Infinite patience even when exhausted. Love so obvious in every interaction. Creativity in making fun of nothing, turning a simple dinner into a fancy restaurant with candles and funny narration. Helping with homework with kindness, even when Lily got frustrated. Singing Owen to sleep when he had nightmares. She worked 8-hour shifts and came home clearly exhausted, yet still did homework with Lily. Still played with Owen. Still cooked dinner. Still cleaned. Never complaining. Never asking for help. Just doing. And Michael saw strength in that. Strength that most people would never have to demonstrate because they were never tested in that way. Claire had been tested beyond what was fair. And she hadn't broken. She had bent. She had survived. She had continued to love children through it all. And there was something deeply admirable about that. Conversations began. Late at night, after the children were asleep, Claire usually sat in the living room with a cup of tea, finally relaxing after a day's work. Michael would come home late from his shift. He often worked until 8 or 9, and find her there. And instead of going straight to his room, he started to sit down too, to talk. At first, superficially, how was your day? Fine, and yours? But gradually, deeper. One night, Claire asked him what he'd been wondering. Why did you do it? Really? Why? Not the answer you give when people ask. The truth, Michael thought. My father taught me that when you see injustice and you can do something about it, you do it. He was a police officer too, 25 years, and he always said that a badge wasn't just authority. It was responsibility, protecting the vulnerable. And you losing your house because your ex ran away from responsibility and the system failed. Injustice that I could correct. So I corrected it. Claire told her story. Not an edited version. The whole thing. Her marriage to Derek. How good it had been in the beginning. How his opioid addiction had legitimately started and escalated. How she had watched the man she loved disappear. The divorce, the 2-year struggle. Every program she applied for and was denied. Every impossible choice. And now I'm here. Depending on the kindness of strangers. 33 years old and I can't provide basic shelter for my children. Shame in her voice. You're not a stranger anymore, Michael said. And it's not about not being able to provide. It's about the system being impossible. You worked. You applied for help. You did everything right. And you still failed because the system is broken. He paused. And you're not depending on kindness. You're accepting help. Important difference. And Michael also shared about his divorce from Linda. How it hadn't been dramatic, but still painful. We just grew in different directions. We wanted different things. And eventually, trying to force it to work was more harmful than admitting it didn't. On co-parenting that was functional, but not close. On the loneliness of living alone after Sophie went to Linda's house. Big, empty house. Dinners alone. And you realize you've spent 3 years just existing, not living, just work, and Sophie, and more work. And you brought life back here. The sound of children laughing, dinner with people. I didn't realize how much was missing until I had it back. A vulnerable confession. And something changed. Not immediate romance, but recognition. A connection between two people who had been lonely in different ways. Recognizing in each other unexpected companionship. The beginning of something, still undefined, still cautious, but real. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the transformation that happened in the 3 months between the initial move and the moment Claire was finally stable enough to consider leaving wasn't just about finances or housing. It was about rebuilding identity, about Claire learning for the first time in years that asking for help wasn't weakness and that accepting support didn't mean losing independence. And it was about Michael discovering that saving someone wasn't about being a hero. It was about being present, consistently, even when it wasn't glamorous or easy. And about recognizing that sometimes, helping someone also saves you. 3 months after the move, Claire had stabilized in ways that seemed almost miraculous compared to where she was in March. She still worked at the Save Mart supermarket, same 32 hours a week, same salary of $11.75 an hour. But the context had changed dramatically. No $1,100 mortgage crushing her budget, no impossible rent. She contributed $300 a month to Michael for housing costs, a number he had chosen as a compromise between nothing because you don't owe anything and something because you insist, and the rest of her income now went to things that really mattered: food, clothes for the children, occasional medical expenses. Michael had connected her with a different social worker, not Jennifer Marks, who had originally threatened to remove children, but Jennifer's colleague, who was more experienced in actually helping instead of processing paperwork. And with Michael's stable address, with evidence of consistent employment, with a letter from Michael confirming residency, Claire's application for SNAP was finally approved. $280 a month in food assistance. Not huge, but enough to make a real difference. Medicaid for the children was also approved, meaning that when Owen had an ear infection, Claire could take him to the doctor without panicking about a $100 bill she couldn't pay. Michael had also helped with the foreclosed house situation. He had spoken to a local investor who bought foreclosed properties, rehabilitated them, and sold them. The investor bought Claire's house for the price the bank was asking. Claire didn't recover equity. She had invested $30,000 in payments over the years and hadn't seen a penny back. But the debt was settled, the foreclosure resolved, starting out financially clean, no outstanding debt haunting her. And that, alone, was freedom. And Claire had started looking for an apartment. Not because Michael was pressuring her, he had made it clear repeatedly that there was no rush, but because she needed to. She needed to know she could, that she wasn't trapped in permanent dependency, that there was a way out if she wanted or needed to. So she looked. 2-bedroom apartments in decent neighborhoods, something affordable, $700, $800 a month that she could afford. With a combination of her salary, SNAP, and small savings, she was finally managing to accumulate without a mortgage draining everything. Michael offered to co-sign when she found a potential place. Your credit is rebuilding, but still low because of the foreclosure. I'll co-sign. Give landlords the security they need. Claire had hesitated. That puts you at risk. If I don't pay, you're responsible. You will pay, Michael said. Simple trust that made her eyes burn. And if you don't pay for a legitimate reason, we'll deal with it. I'm not worried. She found a place. A 2-bedroom apartment on the west side. Not new, but clean. A decent school for Lily and Owen, close to the bus line that went to her work. $750 a month. With SNAP and careful budgeting, manageable. Michael co-signed. Security deposit and first month, $500 total. He lent with the understanding that she would pay it back gradually. No interest, no rush, only when you can. The moving date was set, July 1st. 3 full months after they had moved into Michael's house. Claire started packing again, separating their belongings from shared belongings, preparing the children for another transition. We're going to have our own place again. It won't be big, but it will be ours. Lily was ambivalent. But I'll miss Sophie and Michael. You'll still see them, just not every day. Owen was quiet. He didn't like changes. He had just gotten used to being here. The eve of the move, June 30th, Claire sat with Michael after the children had gone to sleep. They were in the living room as they had been hundreds of nights. But this time, there was weight. Finality. Last night. Thank you, Claire said. Not for the first time, but this time carrying 3 months of meaning. For everything. For seeing the situation when no one else did. For offering help when it would have been easier to just carry out the eviction and move on. For giving me the space and time and security that allowed me to recover. You saved our lives. Literally. I don't know what would have happened if you saved your own life, Michael interrupted gently. A familiar pattern. I just gave you temporary space. You did the work. You stabilized the finances. You applied for assistance. You found an apartment. You did it all. I couldn't have done it without you, Claire insisted. Not just a house, but believing I could. You made me feel seen, like someone who mattered. Not just a problem or a statistic or a case. And it was the first time in years. Voice breaking. It was the first time I felt safe. That children felt safe. And I'm going to miss that. This place. This house. You. Michael looked at her. It was true that he'd been suppressing it for weeks, maybe months, but it finally forced its way to the surface. Me too. The house is going to be very quiet again. Quiet in a way that... He paused. In a way that it's going to hurt. I got used to it. To the sound of children laughing. To dinners together. To you being here. And I know it was always temporary. It was always planned that you two would move out eventually. But that doesn't make it any easier. It doesn't have to stay, Claire said. Her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Quiet. It doesn't have to be temporary. What are you saying? Michael asked, needing clarity. I'm saying the kids love it here. Lily and Sophie are inseparable. Separating them will be devastating. Owen finally opened up. He finally trusts again. And I... Claire took a deep breath. I fell in love with you, not gratitude, not dependence. Real love. For your kindness. For your patience. With the kids. For the way you make coffee every morning. For the way you never made me feel small or useless. For the man who chose to help when it would have been infinitely easier not to. I love you. And I know it's complicated. I know it started as help, and maybe it's inappropriate, and maybe it's too soon, and Michael kissed her, interrupting a spiral of anxiety, interrupting words with action, gentle hands framing her face, a kiss that was tenderness and promise and relief. When they separated, both had tears. Me too, Michael whispered. It's been weeks, maybe months, but I didn't want to pressure you when you were still settling in. I didn't want to make you feel obligated because you lived here. But yes, I love you. I love your strength. I love how you love these children. I love the sound of you laughing with them. I love the life you brought back to this house. I don't want you to leave. Then I'm not leaving, Claire said. Simple. A statement of fact. I'm canceling. The apartment. We're staying. As a real family. Not temporary. Real. Are you sure? Michael asked. Not because it's convenient, but because I want to. Because it's an active choice. I'm absolutely sure, Claire said. And for the first time in years, it's not a choice made out of desperation or lack of options. It's a choice made because I found a place where I belong. A person I belong with. They didn't move. Claire called the landlord the next day, canceled the apartment, lost her security deposit, but it didn't matter, because they stayed. And over the following weeks, change happened. Not dramatically, but gradually. Claire was no longer living there temporarily. She was Michael's partner. Not married, not yet. Too early for that, but committed. They balanced their finances moderately. Claire contributed $500 a month now, more than $300, because she felt right. Michael covered the rest. Equitable within their means. Sophie was ecstatic. Lily's going to stay forever. And Owen. It was like Christmas. Lily and Owen adjusted easily, because really, nothing had changed except the certainty that they weren't leaving. And something in Owen relaxed. The constant anxiety of when are we going to have to go? was finally gone. He started calling Michael Dad casually. "Dad, can you help me?" The first time he said it, Michael froze. He looked at Claire. She nodded. "Permission? Of course, champ," Michael said. His voice was hoarse, always, in the family that neither of them had planned but that they both needed solidified. Not perfect. Claire still had days when financial anxiety returned. Michael still had moments when he questioned whether he had made the right choices. Children fought like children fight, but there was love, real love, built not on fantasy but on months of navigating real challenges together. And it was strong, precisely because of that. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the 6 months following that decision to stay were a period of stability and happiness that Claire barely recognized as her own life. There was routine, normalcy, family dinners, laughter, planning for the future instead of just surviving day to day. And then, in a moment, everything was threatened again. Not by an impersonal system this time, but by a specific person who knew exactly where to strike to cause maximum damage. And the devastating revelation that the past never truly lets you go, no matter how far you run or how stable you become. 6 months after that night, when Claire canceled the move and admitted she was in love, life had transformed in ways that seemed almost surreal. Claire woke up every morning in a house that felt like home. Not temporary, not provisional. Home, with the man she loved sleeping beside her. With the sound of 3 children, Sophie, Lily, Owen, laughing in the hallway. With the coffee Michael always made, because it was his love language. A small, consistent gesture. That said, I was thinking of you without words. The job at Save Mart was the same. Still a shift manager. Still 32 hours. But the context had changed. It was no longer desperate work that still didn't pay enough. It was work. Just work. A contribution to the family income, but not the entire family income. And there was dignity in that. In working because he chose to, not because he literally had no alternative. Michael had proposed one November night, 6 months after Claire had stayed. Nothing elaborate. They were in the living room after the children went to sleep, talking about the day. And Michael simply said, "Marry me." Straightforward. No dramatic kneeling. Just an honest question. Officially. Forever. Not because I need stability, but because I love you and want to build a life with you. He had a ring. Simple. A white gold band with a small solitaire diamond. Not ostentatious, but beautiful. Meaningful. Claire had looked at it, tears already forming. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Without hesitation. Without fear that it was too fast or too complicated. Just certainty. The children had been ecstatic when they told the next day. Sophie, because she was finally going to have siblings, officially. Lily, because she liked the idea of a real family again. Owen, because he had been calling Michael Dad for months anyway. And now it would be real. They set a wedding date for March. A full year after Claire had almost lost everything. Symbolism wasn't lost. In either of them. Small ceremony. Immediate family meaning children, and Michael's ex, Linda, who had eventually accepted the situation when she saw Sophie was happy. A few close friends. Nothing elaborate, just commitment. And life was stable. A word Claire had forgotten the meaning of. Stable, predictable in good ways, happy even, not perfect. There were still challenges. Claire still had occasional nightmares about eviction. Still obsessively checked her bank account. Still had moments of anxiety about, what if it all falls apart again? But Michael was there, anchoring her, reminding her she wasn't alone. That she had built something real. That the past was the past. And then, one December morning, 3 months before the wedding, 9 months after Claire had moved in, an envelope arrived. Registered mail. Michael had left for work. Children at school. Claire alone when the postman knocked. She signed without thinking. She picked up the thick envelope. Equality paper. A law. Firm logo in the corner. A name I didn't recognize. A momentary hesitation. but she opened it and began to read, and her blood literally froze. Not a metaphor, a physical sensation of everything stopping. It was from Derek, her ex-husband, who had disappeared 2 years ago, to whom she hadn't paid child support, who had moved to Nevada and cut off all contact, who had made it clear through silence that he wanted nothing to do with children or parental responsibilities. Custodial petition. Notice in large letters at the top. Legal document. 20 pages of paperwork attached. Claire read, hands trembling so much the paper rattled. Petitioner Derek Morgan seeks modification of existing custody order. I have learned through third parties that respondent Claire Morgan is cohabiting with a man Michael Torres and plans to marry. While petitioner supports respondent's right to relationships, I do not believe it is appropriate for my minor children to be exposed to relationships, so soon after the end of our marriage. Pause to let it sink in. Soon after the end. Divorce had been finalized 2 years ago. Derek had left 2.5 years ago. And now, suddenly, her speed of movement was a problem. He continued reading. The petitioner is concerned that the children are being exposed to questionable influences and emotional instability. As their biological father, it is my right and responsibility to ensure a stable environment. Therefore, I seek primary physical and legal custody of both minors, Lily Morgan 7 and Owen Morgan 6, with supervised visitation for the mother, until she can demonstrate appropriate stability. Primary custody. Supervised visitation. As if she were a danger. As if she were inadequate. She who had raised them alone for 2 years while he disappeared. She who had worked herself to the point of collapse trying to keep them fed and sheltered. She who had navigated the system alone when he didn't pay $1 in child support. And now, he wanted custody. There was more. A section titled Grounds for Change of Custody stated, 1. Mother cohabits with a man outside of marriage, exposing children to inappropriate adult relationships. 2. Mother suffered a severe financial crisis, including foreclosure and near eviction, demonstrating an inability to provide a stable environment. 3. Mother was the subject of a Child Protection Services investigation in March 2025, related to housing adequacy. 4. Children were temporarily homeless and dependent on charity from non-relatives. 5. Mother demonstrated poor judgment in partner choices and financial management. Every point was technically true, but distorted, presented in a way that made it seem like neglect when it was a result of him abandoning her. She was cohabiting, but they were engaged, getting married in 3 months. She had suffered foreclosure because he stopped paying alimony. Social services had investigated because she was literally starving, trying to feed children alone after he disappeared. Children were temporarily homeless for 24 hours, resolved when Michael offered help. All true, all devastating when presented without context. And then came the section that made Claire feel physically nauseous. Petitioner can provide a superior environment, including 1. Stable home with 2 parents. Petitioner married Melissa Brennan in August 2025. 2. Substantial family income, $95,000 year, providing financial security. 3. Permanent residence in a safe community with excellent schools. 4. No history of financial instability or involvement with social services. 5. Extended family, paternal grandparents available for support. Derek had gotten married, August 4 months ago. He had built a complete new life, house, wife, stable income, and now he wanted to add children he had abandoned as the final pieces of the perfect family picture. Or perhaps, a more sinister thought, his new wife wanted children, and he was providing them. Or maybe, someone had told him he had a legal obligation to pay child support that was years overdue, and seeking custody was a way to eliminate that obligation while appearing to be a concerned father. Claire didn't know the motives, but she knew the outcome. The paper in her hand said that the man who had essentially abandoned Lily and Owen when they were babies, who hadn't called on birthdays or Christmases, who hadn't sent any support money, who had blocked her and disappeared, now wanted to take them. away from her. He wanted primary custody, to reduce her to supervised visitation as if she were a threat. And he had the resources to fight: an expensive lawyer, a stable income, an appearance of respectability. Claire read the hearing date. January 15th. 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks to prepare a defense against a man who knew all her weaknesses because he had created many of them by abandoning her. She read his lawyer's address. Las Vegas. Of course, he was still there. In the last line of the document, a copy of this petition has been sent to the County Child Protective Services for review and possible further investigation of the suitability of the current housing environment. He had involved social services again, deliberately, knowing that initiating an investigation, even if it yielded nothing, would create stress and uncertainty. Claire sat in the room, still clutching papers, and she felt everything, all the stability, all the happiness, all the security of the last 9 months threatened to crumble. Because Derek wasn't just petitioning for custody. He was systematically attacking, using foreclosure against her, using social services investigations, using the fact that Michael wasn't the biological father, building a case that painted her as inadequate and him as the savior. And the worst part, it had some basis. The court saw a father with a high income, a home of his own, a stable marriage, versus a mother who had been nearly evicted, who lived with her boyfriend, technically fiancé, but still, who had a documented history with social services, and the judge, looking only at the paperwork, without knowing the full story. He could decide that Derek offered a better environment. Claire held the paper and realized that the man who had abandoned his children 2 years ago, when it was inconvenient, now wanted to take them away from her when it was convenient. And the battle she thought was over was only beginning, with an enemy who knew exactly where to attack because he had inflicted many of the wounds, and he would use each one to paint her as inadequate while portraying himself as a concerned father. And this time, it wasn't an impersonal system. It was personal, deliberate, and devastating. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened in the moments following that devastating discovery, when Claire held a piece of paper that threatened to destroy the family she had so carefully built, was a moment of decision. She could crumble. She could let fear paralyze her as it had in the past, or she could fight, with everything she had, with resources she didn't have before, with someone by her side who wouldn't let her face this alone. Claire called Michael immediately. Her hands were still trembling. He was in a meeting but answered when he saw it was her. "Claire, are you okay?" "No," she said, her voice breaking. "I need you to come home, now, please." He didn't ask any questions. "I'm coming. 10 minutes. And he hung up. Claire heard a distant siren getting louder. He was coming in a police car. Quickly, when Michael arrived, he found Claire still sitting in the living room, papers scattered around her. He read while she watched. He saw her expression shift from confusion to understanding to controlled anger. "This is pure manipulation," he said finally. "He doesn't want these children. He wants control. Or to eliminate child support obligations, or to impress his new wife. But it's not about Lily and Owen. Motivation doesn't matter," Claire said. "What matters is that he has an affair. Papers, income, a house. And I have a history of almost losing everything. You have more," Michael said firmly. "You have their love. You have years of being the sole parent present. You have documented transformation. And you have me. We're going to fight this. And we're going to win." And they fought. They hired a lawyer the best they could afford. Marcus Chen, the same lawyer who had helped Sarah in a previous case, known for complex custody cases. He listened. He took notes. And he said, "Derek is going to lose. He abandoned the children for 2 years. 0 contact, 0 support. You show up now that you're stable. The judge will see through this." But hearings came. Social investigators visited. They interviewed Lily, who, at 7 years old, had to answer questions about where she wanted to live. "With Mommy and Michael," she said. "Simple. of course. Owen too, at 6. Daddy Derek left. Michael is my daddy now. Derek appeared at the hearing. First time Claire had seen him in 2 years. He seemed fine, prosperous, expensive suit, beautiful wife by his side, painting a picture of stability. But when he testified, Marcus tore him apart. Mr. Morgan, when was the last time you spoke to your children? It's been a while. 2 years, approximately. And how much child support did you pay in those 2 years? Silence. 0. I was going through financial difficulties. But now you earn $95,000 a year. The situation improved. Conveniently, the situation improved precisely when your ex-wife stabilized and you decided you wanted custody. Objection sustained, but point made. The judge ruled after 3 months of hearings. Primary custody remains with mother. Father receives standard visitation alternate weekends. Shared holidays conditional on establishing a consistent relationship first. No evidence of maternal inadequacy. Petition denied. Claire collapsed in relief. Michael held her, and they knew their family was safe. Derek appealed. He lost. Eventually, he stopped trying. He visited Lily and Owen 3 times in the first year. Then he stopped. He proved it had never been about them, always about him. And Claire and Michael got married in March as planned. Small ceremony, 3 children as witnesses. Linda was there, finally fully accepting it. And when the officiant said the family we chose, everyone knew it was true. Not a traditional family, but a real one. Built through crisis, strengthened by struggle, tested by time. Look, if you've made it this far with me, if you've felt every moment of this journey with Claire, with Michael, with Lily and Owen, you know that this story is about much more than eviction or custody or romance. It's about resilience when the system fails. About the kindness of strangers who become family. About fighting not just to survive, but to build a life worth living. And about the devastating truth that poverty is not a moral failing. It's a systemic failure that crushes good people who do everything right. If this kind of story resonates with you, if you want to continue following narratives about people refusing to be broken by impossible circumstances, about love built on solid foundations of mutual sacrifice, about protection that comes from unexpected places, subscribing here is the way to continue walking with me on this journey, because there are thousands of Claires fighting silently, thousands of families facing a crisis far from catastrophe, and telling these stories, making people see the humanity behind the statistics, is how we change things. And I need to know, are you with Claire? Are you with Michael, who chose to help when it would have been easier to look the other way? Do you believe the system needs to change to stop punishing poverty as if it were a crime? Then comment below. I'm with you until the end. Let me see how many people truly understand that struggles like Claire's are not exceptions. They are the norm for millions who don't have Michael in their lives. And we need to be a society that creates support systems, not punishment systems. If this touched you in any way at any point you felt Claire's silent despair, pretending to be normal while her world crumbled, if you felt the courage to ask for help when pride screamed against it, if you felt relief when someone finally saw and acted, if you felt hope when the family found a way through the impossible, leave a like so I know. Because stories need to be told. Truths need to be acknowledged. And the more people understand that the choice between food and rent shouldn't exist in a functioning society, the closer we get to real change. And there's a video here that continues in the same vein. Another story of a mother fighting the impossible, of a sheriff witnessing injustice and choosing to intervene, of a family being built through crisis instead of despite it, about real protection, not performance, about love proven through consistent actions, not empty words. Click and follow me there. Because journeys like this never truly end. There are always more stories, more people needing to be seen, more reasons to believe that humanity still exists, even when the system tries to crush it. And I want you with me for all of them.